all over Latin America, what we see is that women have been left aside in terms of for many years. No, they were not considered as a subject, an important subject in coping with the situation, the human situation in Drylands, and the consequence of that were pretty worrying, because you saw that has represented for women so much suffering in terms of work hours, carrying water for long distances, and this has been seen in movies and in stories, in articles. We have seen also families headed by women that were very, very poor, probably among the poorest in the world. I mean, they were certainly within this 1 billion that live below $2 a day, and it's not because of a question of cash flow, but really a question of access to the minimum elements of livelihoods, because they didn't have land to cultivate, they didn't have any means, and they were forgotten, because somehow it was presumed that they had husbands, and the husband maybe as the breadwinner of the family was earning money, but that didn't mean that the money would reach the family, because many of these men have migrated to big areas, and not necessarily that money would go back to their families. That's why these women were called the widows of Drylands, exactly for this reason. And one third difficulty was the lack of infrastructure. Many of these areas do not have electrification, they don't have access to transport or to hospitals. So these women with their families were really left on their own. And the way they have coped, and these were many stories we have heard in Brazil, in other countries of Latin America, they coped by kind of creating connections to whatever was possible. It could be to the social assistance agency that came, or to the rural station agent that came. Whatever was offered to them as a possibility, they grabbed, and from there they built on. And the situation, I would say, in the last 15, 20 years has changed. Climate change adaptation requires a different perspective, a different mindset, because you actually, when you adapt, you have to do things in a different way. You have to change habits, you have to change your mentality, you have to be much more inclusive. And what we know from women as managers of households, as people that because of their upbringing, and because the way also they live, and they have to manage their families sometimes with very little money and very little resources. We actually know that women because who they are much more able to adapt in situations of restrictions, which is the case of climate change. So the experience we have is that when you kind of have strategies or governmental strategies or initiatives from NGOs, women are the first to actually embrace these initiatives. And I can give some examples, like the example of Adaptation, or the examples we see in Brazil, in the dryland areas. Women tend to be much more tend to like cooperation. I mean, like initiatives that ask for people to collaborate. I mean, not to only think about their piece of land or their credit, but to kind of come together and create possibilities that everyone will benefit. And in most of these cases, the majority with people that you count are women, not only because there are many households headed by women in the dryland areas, but also because women tend to understand better that together we can do more than alone, and also because for women the most important is what comes first. What comes first is the family, and sometimes the community, and not themselves. And so they understand very quickly that you have to collaborate. Also, another thing we see in many examples is that women are more open to experiment new things, which is important for adaptation. Sometimes we have to even in small-scale agriculture, we have to experiment new crops. We have to experiment new ways of cultivating the land. You have to manage the crops differently. And for men, it's much more difficult in terms of they tend to be attached to things that they know or they have learned, and they feel proud. They feel proud of. As women, they are open. They think that they embrace help and aid, and they are willing to kind of come together and see what happens. So in another area, so I already talked about how women collaborate in terms of groups, how women embrace new initiatives and experiments that sometimes are scientific experiments. And the third thing is that women are good, they like small-scale commerce as well, even if they don't need to start with big things. I mean, big business or big plans. They can go even with the small things. Even sometimes what is available in these areas is a very small credit, and that many times man or the head of the family is not interested because he thinks it's too small. He won't be able to do anything. While women, they welcome that because they are always very used to manage small amounts of money. So I think if you take these three areas, commerce, collaboration in groups, and experiments, I think in these three areas we see much more engagement of women than of men. And these three areas are critical for adaptation because you have to collaborate if you are going to adapt. You have to kind of experiment, and you have also to earn money in a different way, sometimes starting from very small, because it's many times a new business that haven't been done yet. I see that there are we have to look and pay attention to specific aspects that certainly are critical to benefit women in the situation we know that they have. That they are the most important references for families. So the first thing is to see how the access to water has improved for women. So what we have seen over the years is that policymakers, NGOs have acknowledged that it's important to address policies to provide water not only for productive use, but also for domestic use. And I think this acknowledges the effort that we have seen in the literature, but also in many documentaries, films, of what the lack of water means for the women in terms of work hours in the households. You know, that they have, the many kilometers that they have to walk many times to fetch water to provide for minimal domestic use, and also what does it mean in terms of preventing health issues, you know, that are critical also for women's reproductive roles at the household. So in Brazil, for example, the government has created this campaign, which is also has supported policies and with budgets and specific actions, which is called Water for All. And that means that every house has to have a cistern, has to have a well. You know, the government is projecting 700,000 new wells for households in dryland areas, which means that this is willing to respond to specific domestic uses, which are the necessities, which are specifically address the needs of the families, but specifically of women. Another area of adaptive capacity, which I think is very critical for women, is the electrification of the rural areas. That is also, we know that for many years these areas, because they don't have, they commercially are not interested, they have been left aside. So any small city in an area which commercially was viable and interesting was considered more important than a dry land and remote area in which maybe houses are not very close to each other. But this is changing, and this is part of policies that we see all over Latin America that are also using the benefit of the renewable energy, because with solar panels it becomes less costly to kind of provide light to a household, in spite of the fact that is not close to other households. And that certainly benefits women, because households electrification means that you have access to domestic appliances, and you can use a wash machine, you can use an iron, you can use an oven, an electric oven. You can use many of these appliances that mean a little bit more comfort and also less hours of work for women. And also, of course, this is not all, but they can also mean that women have the benefit at the evening to read and to see a television and to educate themselves, not only them but also their children, and this is critical. Another area of adaptive capacity which is very important is the access to transport, with roads and that allow women to use like a transport to go to the cities, to go to hospitals, to bring their children to school. And this has also been a concern, because we know again that these remote areas sometimes tend to be very isolated. And then we go to more specific strategies of livelihoods, like access to irrigation and to forms of irrigation that use pumps and do not mean that we have to carry water to water your plants, your gardens and places where you grow your food. And then I think one more adaptive capacity which is growing in these areas is like the benefits of accessing like small markets and other connections through cooperatives, through microcredit, through capacity building, technical capacity building, which are all very critical for women to improve their lives.